Hi, this is Brittany Bowles with our weekly installment of my book, Finding Starlight. This book is written by me. It is not published yet, but hopefully it soon will be. Really trying to get discovered right now by Reese Witherspoon and Ellen DeGeneres because of their amazing work uplifting women and really helping elevate women's stories. That's what this is. This is the story of my life as told through the lens of a past life regression session. It is a true story as much as I can recall the events in my life. There are a lot of triggers, a lot of abuse and neglect and addiction. So just be aware of that as you do start following along. And if you want to catch up on any of the previous chapters, this is chapter 8 today. The previous chapters are on my website, brittnybowles.com. So let's get right into it. Tonight's chapter is chapter 8 of Finding Starlight by me, Brittany Bowles. And she was unprepared for the duration of the winter, for the harshness of the cold. She had never seen a storm without the calm. She did her best to fan the warm flame of life, to keep herself alive and fighting. She tried to put the hot liquor down and learn to mother in the north. From Uprooted. Chapter 8, Burning Bridges and Reading Poems. Mercifully, that vision faded out of the cloud rather more quickly than the others. Its surface rippled like it too was shivering, and then it hovered, still and silver white, once more. I continued where the cloud had left off. Luckily for me and Amber, it didn't take much more for my mom to break things off with Luke. She really did get taken away in an ambulance when he slammed her head repeatedly in his car door, and I think he may have spent the night in jail over it. So, when she'd had enough, we moved back across the river to Minnesota. Mom then proceeded to go to rehab, leave 2 weeks early, and burn down our entire apartment building. I said casually. It was a story I had told many times. What? Katrina yelled. Rehab was a semi-annual occurrence for Mom, I answered. This time, she almost made it through the whole thing. But Easter was coming, and she used it as an excuse to leave early, saying she was confident she'd remain sober and just needed to be with her girls. As usual. And as usual, I did not believe her. The day she got out was Good Friday, the weekend of Easter. We went to pick up one of her drinking buddies or lovers, I don't know. The second I saw him, I knew the day was lost. There went sobriety. Mom said they were going to hang out and that we could have a friend over too. It would be like a little party, she said. They got drunk, and she fell asleep with a cigarette in her hand, burned the whole place down. It was quite the scene, right downtown Stillwater, basically on Main Street. My voice was tinged with cynicism, intentionally bored and understated. I'm going to need more details, Katrina said. She wasn't going to let me off that easily, I could see. I elaborated. My sister, our friend, and I were asleep in the bedroom when I woke up to my mom's voice. She was screeching, "It's in the kitchen now!" Well, I thought she must be screaming about a spider, overreacting as usual. She was being super loud and crazy, though, so I got out of bed and went to the kitchen. Sure enough, I saw huge flames coming from the other room. I mean, huge. This was not a bucket of water situation. We needed to get the hell out of there. I tried to get Mom to leave, but she wouldn't listen to me, and the fire was out of control. She was attempting to grab the phone that was still on the table in the living room. I don't know where her friend was, and I didn't care. We only had one door out, which was in the kitchen. and we were on the second story. If we didn't leave and fast, we were going to burn up in there. When it was obvious that Mom was useless and immovable, I woke up Amber and our friend. I remained calm, put on their winter coats and boots, and got us out of the burning apartment. Mom didn't even acknowledge us. I left her there, hoping she would come to her senses, but caring far more about my sister at that point. We trudged down the dark, snowy street with unzipped coats over our PJs to a neighbor's house. By the time I had the kids inside and called 911, I could see flames coming out of the windows of my building down the way. My mom was still inside, I assumed, and could only hope that she would make it out. There was no going back at that point. How old were you when this happened? Katrina asked in a hushed voice. I was 9, maybe 10 years old, I answered. I said, I watched the fire trucks, cops, and ambulances speed down the street. The neighbors wouldn't let me go back to our apartment, so I had to just wait by the window. She did make it out, my mom. She had bad burns on her arm and spent a few days in the hospital recovering. But she didn't die. Well, not that day. I finished with a tinge of disgust on my tongue. So what did happen after that? Katrina asked. I paused to think. So much had happened. It was difficult for me to recall exactly what order things took place or where we lived at certain times. Well, immediately after the fire, we went with Dad. He came for us in the middle of the night, probably before the fire was even all the way out. He took us to Marion's, where I laid on the very edge of the bed, sick to my stomach, waiting for news that never came. It was still Easter weekend, though, so Dad had to work. He always worked holidays because of the overtime pay. I think Marion had work too, so Amber and I stayed with our cousins, Nikki and Lisa, the next night, which was Saturday. Our Aunt Cindy had the biggest heart. I don't know to this day how she managed it, but somehow between Saturday when we got there and Easter morning on Sunday, she had made baskets and gifts for Amber and me like nothing ever happened, like she'd been expecting us all along. Like she was an Easter saint. Tradition at their house was to wake up and go on a hunt for the baskets. Of course, Amber was so little that she still believed in the Easter bunny, and I didn't know what Aunt Cindy had done. I had stayed up most of the night, nauseous again, preparing to explain to Amber why the bunny didn't come for us that day. But it was a story I never had to tell. My eyes filled up with tears at the memory of the baskets overflowing with candy and toys. Amber's freckled face, squealing and laughing as she discovered her basket with chocolate all over her mouth, came back to me like it had happened yesterday. I remembered hugging my aunt and telling her how grateful I was to her for saving Easter. She never even said a bad word about my mother, I told Katrina with shining eyes. Nobody talked about the fire or Mom's failed rehab attempt. We just enjoyed the holiday, I remembered. My aunt and uncle had their own demons, but they never spoke ill about my mom's. All they did was love us and take us in without question whenever we asked. Affected by my emotion, Katrina said, "She sounds like a lovely woman." She was, I agreed. I have a lot of memories at Aunt Cindy and Uncle Randy's house growing up. Nikki, Lisa, and I were very close. I bet there was a stage in life where I slept over there almost every weekend. I'm glad you had somewhere like that in your life, she said, and I nodded. Abruptly, I said, so that was how it happened. After the fire, Amber and I moved in with Dad. Katrina asked, did you live with him and Marion, or just your dad? I said, Dad and Marion broke up. Their relationship was already deteriorating by that time, and he had his own studio apartment. He got a bigger place for Amber and me, but we did still sometimes spend time at Marion's. Many years later, she told me that she had stayed with him for so long because of Amber and me. She wanted to protect us, loved us like her own children. But he was awful to her, and she couldn't stand it. Katrina asked, "Was that tough for you?" "Dad and Marion's breakup?" I clarified, and she nodded. "It was. I mean, I was proud of her for leaving him, really. But Marion's family had become my family. I knew her brother and his kids. We considered ourselves cousins. She had a son, Matt, who was like my stepbrother for a while. Her house was a safe space for me to relax and be myself. Trust that we would be taken care of for once. She was good to Amber, which made me love her that much more. She was more of a mom to us than mine ever was. But they fought. They did drugs. They were super dysfunctional, and I knew it would have to come to an end. My dad just wasn't good enough for her, and we all knew it." "I understand," Katrina said, and added, "You were a perceptive child to notice all of that. It seems like there wasn't much getting past you, even as a little kid." Her praise made me feel good, and I smiled, thanking her. "You're absolutely right about that. I probably knew way more than any child should, honestly." One day, I discovered a contract Mom and Dad signed. It was handwritten by my mom on a scrap piece of paper and basically said, "I, Shelley, give permanent custody of my daughters, Brittany and Amber, to Carrie as of this day." That was it. Nothing fancy, no terms and conditions, just a little note and a swipe of the pen, and she gave us up for good. "Did your dad or anyone ever discuss this with you, or did you just find the paper and keep it to yourself?" she asked. I wanted to laugh at the absurd notion that anyone would deign to discuss something with me, but I refrained. "Katrina doesn't know," I reminded myself. "Normal people have conversations about major life changes." To her, I answered, "We weren't really allowed to question my dad. He took most questions as challenges to his authority, and that never ended well. I learned pretty quickly to keep my thoughts and opinions to myself or face serious consequences. So no, I never told anyone I found the, I made air quotes, contract. And we never talked about the transition from moms to dads. We were all on the same page by that time anyway, that Mom was no longer fit to be a parent. It had become painfully obvious. She noted, "What a significant change for you to go from living with your mom, who sounds fairly neglectful, to moving in with your dad, who sounds rather strict." I raised my eyebrows to emphasize her point, which could not have been more accurate if she had stolen it directly from my brain. Oh, yeah. It was two totally opposite sides of the coin. The coin being neglectful, abusive homes. I wouldn't call either situation a healthy, happy upbringing, but Dad certainly kept a tighter hold on us. He worked a lot, so he still ran wild when he wasn't around. But when he was home, it was a demanding environment. I had to learn to cook dinner and to do the dishes every single day. I was expected to make all of our lunches and become essentially the woman of the house. I got Amber and me ready for school and walked us there in the mornings. Dad took out his anger on me, and I was our primary support during that time. And even with all of that new responsibility and pressure, living with Dad gave me more perspective to process how bad it had really been with Mom. It was undoubtedly an improvement in regards to our basic needs being met. We had a steady home, plenty of food to eat, and a reliable little social network of neighbors and friends. I slept better at night for a while, knowing I would always wake up in the same place. Katrina's eyes were shining with emotion, but I didn't want her pity and said so. I know it sounds bad, I said, but this stuff really doesn't bother me. I've always been a strong person, always quick to take responsibility for myself and others. It made me feel like I had some kind of control, which I desperately needed. She replied, "That may be, but no child should have to live the way you did with your mom. It breaks my heart to hear why it was such a relief to move in with your dad." "I don't want pity," I said, looking down. "I don't pity you," she insisted. "I admire you. You are a very special being." I almost asked her why she chose the term being instead of person, but she interrupted my thought by asking me to continue what I was saying about living with Dad. I replied with a question. "Remember the DARE program in schools?" I asked, and she nodded. "We had to write essays about how we would stay off drugs, and I won the contest for my region. I wrote about Mom and the fire. I remember because it was my first public speaking engagement. I read it in front of the entire school at a public assembly. Our families were invited, and Dad and Marion were both there in the audience. I made just about everyone cry and got a standing ovation." I smiled with pride at the memory. You know, me telling you this is reminding me of some of the ways Dad did try his best to be there for me as a kid. Even though he was strict, mean, abusive, he did take me in and do everything he knew how to do to keep me safe and make me feel cared for. Like this other time, the school was having an open house. Our classroom was set up like a coffee house to read poetry. Dad came to listen to me read some of my stuff and even shouted out a request for his favorite, "Sea of Diamonds." It was about the way the water looked from the middle of the lake where we went every summer. People kept asking for encores, so I read just about every poem I'd ever written that day. And Dad stayed the whole time. "You were already writing at that time?" Katrina asked. "Yes," I emphasized. "My first notebook was a spiral-bound little thing that my mom had picked up at rehab. It had pink flowers and the Serenity poem on the front cover. The first poem I wrote when I was 9 or so years old was called Smoke, 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 about the way my bedroom filled with cigarette smoke at Luke's house and how much I hated their loud, drunken parties." Katrina just smiled in a knowing way, so I continued talking about my dad. Things with Dad weren't always all bad. Once I got over my fear of boats, we had a lot of fun going on our annual fishing trip to northern Minnesota. That was something I loved to do with him. He had a little old bow rider, and we'd take it out on the river or up to the lake a few times each summer. Dad would fish and let my sister and me swim, take us tubing, and drop us off on the islands to play while he anchored nearby. Those were actually good times. Nikki and Lisa's parents had a boat just like Dad's. Sometimes we'd all go out on the river together. Aunt Cindy packed huge coolers full of food for everyone, and we'd hop back and forth from boat to boat. It was my favorite thing in the world. That sounds like a huge improvement, Katrina said. You had some happy memories? You were close with your cousins? These are all good things. Yes, they were good things, I agreed. but there were bad things all in between. One day, when Amber and I came home from school, right when I opened the door to the apartment building, I heard horrible wailing coming from our unit. I sent Amber to the next door neighbor's house and then went in to find Dad in hysterics on the living room floor. I'd never seen someone so upset. It was heartbreaking. I quietly walked over to him, not really sure what to do. He wrapped his arms around my waist and sobbed into my stomach for a while, trying to tell me that it was really finally over between him and Marion. She had left him for good this time. I wasn't sure he was ever going to recover. You mentioned already that he has major abandonment issues, she said kindly. It probably did feel like the end of the world when his girlfriend broke up with him. I agreed. Definitely. I had no question he was totally lost without Marion. On the other hand, I was proud of her and happy that she finally got away from him. He wasn't as abusive with her as he had been with Mom, but their fights were just as ugly. Her leaving Dad gave me hope for women. It showed me how to stand in my power. I paused for a moment to appreciate that realization. I explained to Katrina she was always empowering me in subtle ways like that. I'll never forget her advice to me about makeup. Don't wear a lot of makeup every day, she said, because you're plenty pretty without it. Then, when you do decide to put on a little more, you'll really dazzle them. That sounds like great advice, she concurred. Between Marion and my cousin Nikki, I felt like I had a good idea of the kind of woman I wanted to be. And my mom was the perfect example of the kind I did not want to become. Nikki was my role model. I was devoted to her. She was the prettiest, most popular, outgoing, smartest person I had ever met. She had a million friends and a great boyfriend from my perspective. She did well in school, didn't really fight with her parents, and was never mean to anyone. I used to pray at night that I would turn out like her. I smiled thinking about it. I spent as much time with Nikki as I possibly could, and with her sister Lisa, but that was a different relationship. Lisa was more emotional and serious. She wasn't as naturally happy or outgoing and always managed to take offense to things. But we were very close. We wrote each other letters for a few years in the actual mail. I looked up to her a lot, and I felt like she saw wisdom in me. One summer, we were invited to Aunt Cindy's family reunion in northern Wisconsin. It was a big camp out with tons of people. Nikki, Lisa, and I were already into some bad stuff by then, drinking, smoking cigarettes, messing around with boys. I guess I was keeping up with them in a way, even though I was younger. I was 10, 11, 12, and they were teenagers. The family reunion was pretty much a free-for-all. Everyone got drunk and had a ton of fun. Somebody gave us, or we took, wine coolers one night and drank them in a treehouse. Lisa's boyfriend at the time was this intellectual hippie-type guy who came with us. He brought a bottle of Southern Comfort, which we mixed with grape soda. We played a game that involved us laying flat on our backs and smoking a whole cigarette as fast as we could, and then getting up and twirling around until we fell over. You know, normal kid stuff, I said sarcastically, amused despite myself. Katrina was neither surprised nor judgmental. She was just listening again, letting me tell my story. I think Dad suspected these types of things went on, but since it was his brother, and since he worked so much anyway, he didn't usually put up a fight when I asked to go over there. I think he welcomed the break for my sister and me. Suddenly becoming a single dad couldn't have been easy, I reflected. It was nice to remember this brief, almost carefree time. He didn't stay a single dad for long, though. Within a year of Marion ending things, he started dating another woman, Jane. She had 5 kids of her own, the youngest of which was my age. Once she came into the picture, things changed again. She wasn't a drinker and disapproved of us spending so much time at Uncle Randy and Aunt Cindy's house. They were alcoholics too, though not the same way as Mom. Jane took an interest in my exploits. Because I wasn't used to having anyone ask about my life, I was totally open and honest with her. That backfired severely. She decided that I was at risk and convinced Dad to keep a tighter watch on me. All that translated to was him being angry at me more often and me feeling guilty about existing. Then, at the end of my 6th grade year, Dad declared that we were moving in with his new girlfriend, soon-to-be wife, and her kids in another town. I would be switching school districts right before starting junior high, which felt devastating. We had stayed in that apartment with Dad longer than anywhere we'd ever lived before, and I had gotten comfortable. That's understandable, Katrina validated. He did ask me what I thought about moving and about his girlfriend. He genuinely wanted my approval, I could tell, so I gave it. How could I not? I remembered. To Katrina, I said, the last thing that happened before we moved was a cool way to go out, though. Someone from the town remembered me from that open house at the school or from my DARE essay. They invited me to read the annual Memorial Day poem at the end of the parade that year. The poem was In Flanders Fields, and I memorized it. On stage at the graveyard, I recited it with passion to a crowd of hundreds. I'll never forget how much I loved that feeling. It was the moment I knew that I wanted to speak in front of people as a career and that I was good at it. Strangers mailed cards to the school thanking me and saying it was the best they'd seen through all the years they'd lived in that town. I smiled. Discovering my talent and passion at such a young age was incredible, and I would always be grateful for that opportunity. So we went out on a good note, despite my feelings. In hindsight, I've wondered what would have happened if I had shared my reservations with Dad the day he asked. Would we have been spared all that pain and loss? I don't know. But I made the right choice. Supporting people, loving them, putting their needs before my own has always been my thing, you know? I paused, and Katrina nodded her agreement. It was obvious. The night before my first day of 7th grade at the new school, I finally broke down. Reality sank in when I realized how different my life was going to be from then on. I called Nikki and cried my heart out. She told me everything was going to be okay, just to be myself and try to have fun. I did try, but life with our new family was rarely fun, I explained. The sick feeling was returning to my belly. I knew we were about to delve into more dark memories. That's what I'm here for, I reminded myself, and shifted on my moss patch, steeling myself to retell or relive my adolescence. And that concludes chapter 8 of my book, Finding Starlight. I go live on Wednesdays with these chapters. So I'll see you next Wednesday with chapter 9, Blending Like Oil and Water. If you want to catch up on these videos or forward them to anybody, Ellen, Reese Witherspoon, they're all available on my website, BrittanyBowles.com, and of course on Instagram and Facebook as well for a little while. So guys, thank you so much. This means everything to me. I really, really appreciate you watching. Until next time.